Have you ever, I don't know, caught yourself mid-draft spinning a scene thinking, this 19th century moment in Paris feels good, except for the characters are sipping espresso from paper cups while debating the Eiffel Tower's rustic charm, and then a reader tells you, hey, you may have built that a decade too late. All I'm saying is, sure, your narrative's heart is vivid, but the details betray it, yanking the readers from its existence. Facts? Who needs them? Well, your narrative does. And I'm just saying, at least to a point. Dragons are going to dragon. But a car from 1967, Texas, is going to have some rules and boundaries. And just so you know, research and authenticity, okay? Just so you understand, the fix isn't endless fact checking. I assure you, you don't have to do years and years of research, though you can. Have fun, enjoy yourself. But the idea for. I'd go crazy. I'd go crazy if I was like 7 years of research. But this lesson is more about going into over research and authenticity, going way over, but also what you could do to sort of, what kind of research can you do? Because if you have a fantastic scene in your head, a tense hostage negotiation, a precise medical procedure, or a character expertly diffusing a tense historical crisis, you want to at least make sure that it's grounded in some truth or logic, even if it is fiction. Now, there's a thing called the currency of trust. And I tell you right now, sir or madam, or as you are, I'll say this much. Your readers need to trust you. I'm sure you've heard people say that. I'm sure you heard me say that. But authenticity in storytelling is a powerful currency. Okay? More so if it's invisible. Like if the truth of the world and the logic of the world is so well integrated that it is invisible. Like the reader doesn't feel like they are learning something about what they already know. For example, if I tell you about, whatever, a specific year of a Mustang car, and it was the year the car came out, and it doesn't make them second guess themselves, but it also makes them go, oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Like, it's invisible. It's just moving the narrative along, and it's not confusing. However, that's the thing. When you're when you're writing about the U.S. military, and you start naming the wrong ranks, etc., it's harder to miss that. You know what I'm saying? If they're like, a private is giving orders to a general, and the general's like, all right, private, speaking of, maybe you're not necessarily writing about weapons per se, but even Reacher gets away with a little sleight of hand with details. But again, you can't have a private giving sergeants instructions and orders. It stands out, and I tell you, it's very irritating for many readers. Readers then can't trust what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? It affects their reading. However, if it's subtle truth that makes fictional experience feel lived in, that's a whole other story, right? But looking beyond your fictional world and the reader on the craft side, you have to really know what you're talking about, because then it hones your skill and your awareness, and they say, okay, I could relax. I don't have to think about, is this true or not? I could just enjoy the book. So basically, you want to research details where they become shorthand for deepening those themes, for placing cultural nuance, or underscoring isolation within a lecture. How do I layman's that? See, the goal isn't to be Wikipedia. Hey, I learned all of this, so let me put it in there, because after 7 years, I think I'm going to use all the information. No. The goal is more to make the world feel lived in. And the way you do that is you shorthand information. You present it through behavior or interaction. Even a fantasy kingdom or a small town in a romance, right? There are social systems. There are behaviors. There are nuances that shape believable lives. In a tavern, they might walk in and touch, the bell as they walk in. Ding, 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 right? They all do that. And the bell is the only thing that stood at the end of the war of whatever, 17-1. Okay, and it's the way to honor the fallen who protected this city at the last bit, and they held off long enough for reinforcements to come. Whatever the case is, right? We don't have to really super explain that. But again, if you're writing about Scotland, all right, and there's stuff going on in Scotland, you want to at least know what the towns were, and more importantly, just so you know, make sure that town existed in the time period you're writing about. Now, again, it might be historical fiction where the town never changed names, and that's different. But that creates the context that is definitely needed in your first act. But facts are important, all right? And more importantly, in a fantasy novel, you don't need someone explaining what they're doing when they're mending a wound, but you can have them do things, showing this knowledge in how they might shorthand something. Maybe use a specific remedy. A medical person might know, but someone else wouldn't. However, why would they explain what they're doing? They would just add honey to a wound, and that says more about what their knowledge is of healing, especially in a fantasy novel set in Knights and Dragons, than it would if they explain what the honey is doing. There's no need to explain what the honey is doing. It's just that they are doing it. And that's shorthand. It's enough to represent the truth. Okay? And it's this way of using your research and know-how that'll build that trust with your readers, because then they're like, oh, I get it. Now, by the way, even if it's wrong, because let's say they put mustard on a wound, okay? But it's a fantasy world, all right? The thing is, you have to at least have context that mustard can heal wounds in your world, so that has to be set up before you do get to that. But it doesn't mean you have to explain that mustard does heal. But if it's like, let's say the apothecary opens up their thing and they have all these and they have mustard there, and they're like, let's see, it's a certain kind of wound. All right, mustard will definitely work. Then that's lending to the confidence of the character and in-world logic. You don't necessarily have to explain that it works. It would be questioned probably, but if it makes sense within the logical workings of the characters and it's not overly explained and it fits within the movement of who they are, then that becomes its own truth. So you can play around with certain things. But I would, because things like that, that's a small detail. So the smallest credible detail is more important than going into the greater depth of things. And I would say too many writers approach research like they're writing a term paper, which, by the way, can lead to writing black holes where you're not writing at all. You're just gathering information for a book. You're just like, hey, I need to know this. It's like productive procrastination or analysis paralysis. Don't research to show off what you've learned. Research to understand what you're writing about. Right? Write what you know. Well, if you research to understand it, as Albert Einstein once said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it enough. So if you're a writer who's a chef, you don't need to know every culinary technique. You need to understand the movement within a professional kitchen, the hierarchy, the pressure, the language, the small frustrations that define the job, but not necessarily what every knife is called. And keep in mind that knowing and understanding are not the same thing. So when you're researching, the research is helping you learn the finer details that will help you approach your world's logic or the information being presented and how character actions and dialogues all interact. Here's a quick aside. You'll get more out of a mundane moment of using your learned research than you'll get from dramatic ones. I know, it sounds weird, but the boring parts, the routine, you know what I'm saying? The small irritations that someone in that world would deal with has more impact. Let me repeat that, okay? So it's the boring, mundane stuff that characters do, the routines, getting up and going to the well, getting water, going back, putting it into, like, let's say there's like a hole in the side of a building and they put that in there and then they go, and you see other people doing that. That's telling you something about the world without explaining it, okay? And then if somebody goes into a house, there's water flowing in like a ravine in a certain area, and it turns out that's how they do their water for the day. Okay, and that water is for cleaning dishes or cleaning fruits and vegetables, whatever the case is. All right, so you don't have to explain that. You just need to show it in steps, you know? So basically, don't go dumping 3 pages of historical context into a chapter. Seed that knowledge instead through character behavior, how the environment is influenced by it, and know when and where to dig deeper. Again, you don't need to describe the entire assembly line of a 1940s printing press or its process. What you do need to think about is the sound of the rollers sticking, or the smell of the oil, or the lead, all right? Or how it might break, or maybe how characters find easier ways to work that machine, because there's the way it works, and then there's the stuff that people learn to do. All right? Anyway, and to conclude this specific tip, think about this for the smallest details as well. What's the one thing a tourist would miss, but an expert would notice? That detail right there, a specific type of coffee cup used in a police precinct, or the unique way a blacksmith holds their thongs, is going to be your win. Okay? It's little details like that. All right. Okay. All right. Now we're to a very important part of this lesson, the logic of constraint. Okay? If your character needs to send a message across Europe in 1650, they can't just send an email. I mean, they can if you set up the ordinary world to show that this alternate version of Earth is more advanced. But that becomes the logic of that world, and therefore it's new constraint. So, when you're writing a fictional narrative, you have a lot of leeway, but your research is to understand the logic of what we as people already know. Superman can breathe in space. Why? There's a logic to his powers, just as the Flash can run through walls. But, Barry Allen aside, you, me, we can't do either of those things, and the logic sticks. Regular people can't, and those superheroes can. This comes down to real-world knowledge versus the bending of that information. So it's good to do the research to learn about what is logic and what can be bent, twisted, or outright changed. I'll say this much. You could do anything you want in a narrative, and that's true. It's all made up. But you must create a foundational understanding of things within your first act, and I'd argue up to the midpoint conflict. Now, after the midpoint conflict, it's all about solving the problem of the midpoint conflict, so don't add new information after your midpoint conflict. But anyway, so if you want people to be able to fly in your narrative set on Earth in 1978, the year I was born, they either have to use a plane or you have to explain how it's possible for them to fly like Superman within the first half of your narrative. But before I move on, here's another quick aside for a more down-to-earth example. No? Okay. In a legal thriller set in our world, you can invent the case, the characters, and the outcome. All that is at your disposal. What you can't do in our Earth is reinvent how a motion to suppress evidence works, or what happens during jury selection, or how long a trial actually takes. However, if I may, in courtroom dramas, as you know, the lawyer can walk around. They could go up to the thing, the person there, the witness. They could talk to. Right. Traditionally, if you notice, if you watch any cases, they go to a podium and they speak their mind because they don't walk around. But for dramatic irony and dramatic tension and dramatic movement, they are allowed to go. Look at these pitches. Do you see, what is this? That's right, bushes. Very good. Just say it. When you see it, just call it out. These two youths. You're allowed to play with movement in that sense. You're allowed to break those barriers. But as far as the legal process goes, if you watch even My Cousin Vinny, they are following legal rules. Now, a lawyer has those rules they must follow. So you got to know your stuff with that. However, once you do understand it, you can break rules, or rather laws of writing, just like my cousin Vinny does. And hopefully when you do bend procedure, it's for dramatic effect based on an informed choice and not just, hey, look what I did. If you love what you've been watching and you just haven't done so already, please subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss out. And of course, YouTube is always telling me about this algorithm thing where if you like, comment, and share the video, boom. And I want to tell you, everybody's been liking, sharing, and commenting and doing so much. I'm so proud of all this beautiful, compassionate support, and it has been showing. This channel continues to grow, and that's because of you, the viewers, and my love to you. With that said, peekaboo, I found you. So how do you know if you need to do the work? Look, you have to take some time and do a little scanning in your narrative, especially when you're done writing it. When you find things you wrote based on an assumption, but you're not fully sure of it, it might mean you need to do a little bit of research. Don't let assumptions leave you cold. In fact, this is the most important. This is the most important when details matter, either through expertise, laws like physics or legal, and anything that is a skill or trade. Usually medical scenes, legal scenes, technical procedures, historical settings, cultural practices, etc., etc., etc. Martial arts, fighting. Sometimes you can't. Your arm doesn't. You can't take your arm off and use it as a hammer. I mean, you can. You just can't put it back. But if you're writing a character who is a pilot and there's a scene where they're flying a plane, that's a place you need to really make sure you're doing the research. They can't just be like, oh, the plane flies itself and lands. Well, you have to establish that then before the midpoint conflict. But if I were you, when you're going through reading, just make a list as you're reading, as you come up to things that feel like one of those elements. If it's cultural, if it's historical, if it's technical, if it's legal. But if you're writing even a fantasy novel, that you're making up all the cultural elements and the technology in the world, write that down too, because then you just want to make sure that the logic is playing out throughout the book. Okay? So, basically, that's all I'm saying. And by the way, not everywhere. Just the places where you're getting it, where you're like, this is important narratively. But, you don't have to go too deep into it. Like, if being a blacksmith isn't part of the story and somebody just goes to get a sword and the blacksmith is like using a pen, or a spoon to hammer the metal, like, so what? Just keep it going. Maybe people won't notice. But it's obviously I'm making an exaggerated joke. But if it's, you got some playroom. That's all I'm saying. But also, honestly, a 20-minute conversation with an expert in the field would behoove you, more so than Googling. So keep that in mind. All right, before we go any further, makearightleft.com. I just want you to know you can find everything, including my books, and also you could explore my news, which I keep up. Currently, I have this book out. Make a right left here. Breaking down success. It's all about writers and actors and comedians, how to be successful in your field of interest. This specifically is all about the foundation of longevity. It's book 1 of 5. More so, by the time this video comes out, this book is definitely published because I pre-record these videos, especially right now. It's October right now, 2025. This book should be out, and it's all about the 27 plot point outline, how to outline using it, but more importantly, if you are not a plotter, it also teaches you the deeper dive into narrative and purpose of narrative, and it shows you how to break down narrative and character arcs and all these other things. So it does a whole bunch of other stuff that teaches you how to look at your narrative while you're writing from the seat of your pants. And more importantly, Death of a King is available on Patreon only currently. One day it'll be published. You'll be able to get a physical copy, but right now it is chapter at a time. Very fun stuff. I do recommend taking a little look-see, and I really appreciate all the love. So let's get to it. Let's keep it going. Assignment. Time to practice. When you're not writing, take Think about a job, a place, or a historical era that you know absolutely nothing about that you feel like you would like to use in a future narrative or the narrative you're working on. Maybe even competitive sailing. Things sane people would do for fun. Anyway, do a little research on it, but, don't go too crazy. Find one thing, okay, for each of the 5 senses. That's how you control your research. One thing for each of the 5 senses. What does it smell like? What sound it makes? What visually defines it? What the tools feel like? And maybe what kind of food is eaten there. You might be like, what? Yeah, like if you're thinking about a historical time or a location, whatever the case is, even if it's fantasy and fiction. Basically, once you have that, take those 5 sensory elements and write a 300-word scene that shows the emotional experience of it. Not what you learned about it, but how you can use what you learn to make it happen. Final thoughts. At the end of the day, your world's not just seen, but inhabited, where a single, hard-won detail can open the door up for readers. When readers trust you, they're not reading to see what else you got wrong. They're enjoying the invisible truths. It's like that for a lot of things. No one notices the greatness when the crap stands out. They're like, that is wrong, and that is wrong, but it's cool that Superman can fly. And you know what? It's like musicians. When I used to play on stage, no one noticed the mistakes unless I noticed them, made a face, and called it out with my behavior. If the notes around the performance were great, the performance was great. Stop doubting yourself. Same with writing. And besides, it's not about proving you know things, but you, as a writer, should care enough to learn, absorb, and let it become part of your narrative telling so you can assimilate information into the natural state of your narrative. When you honor the truth of the world you're creating, you honor the reader stepping into it because you are saying, I care, so you can care. So don't chase perfection and every single accurate thing you can find, but instead chase the honesty of the moment, the emotional truth, because truth is what turns your fictional world real. All right, next video in this series is what an inciting incident does and should do. Remember, this is about the rules of writing, so we were focusing on the rules of an inciting incident and how it basically affects your narrative. But more importantly, if you have a video lesson you'd like me to do, let me know in the comments below, and I will happily record that randomly throughout the year because just as you know, I pre-record my full year for every Wednesday, Friday video, and then also I do Saturday, Sunday live, but that doesn't mean I can't put out another video, especially on a Tuesday, a Monday, or a Thursday, based on somebody's interest. If you haven't done so already, please like the video, share the video if you can, comment. I love to hear comments, but more importantly, subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss out. I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and as always, keep developing the right mindset. See you next time. Bye!